Are you stuck in the same old routine at work? Do you find yourself hitting a creative wall, unable to see beyond your current perspective? It's time to break free and unlock the power of fresh perspectives. David Gouthro back with another episode of Discover Fresh Perspectives. And today we'll discover some from my guest, Adam Christing. Welcome, Adam.
Hey, thank you, David. Great to be with you.
So, Adam, I know very little about you. We'll explore that together today with the folks that are listening. But the topic that seems to be running through your work in your life is humor, and even more specifically, laughter, in a book that just came out. So, you don't strike me as being a comedian, and I think people need to understand there's a difference between a comedian and someone that uses humor and talks about humor. Is there a distinction in your mind?
Well, that's a great question. I love that question. I think a comedian who's doing it full time is anyone who can make someone laugh. And so something happened, especially in the US in the 1980s, 90s, where comedy became known for being vulgar, And I remember growing up watching Laurel and Hardy movies or the Andy Griffith Show, or also I grew up at this place in Los Angeles, David, called the Magic Castle, which is this famous private club. Have you heard of it?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Yeah, and if you'd ever like to go as my guest, let me know and I'll get you a pass. But what I was exposed to was the magic of variety, juggling, ventriloquism, comedy magic, and of course, stand-up comedy. But when you talk about the difference in the event speaking world, sometimes people say the difference between a comedian and a speaker is a speaker has an extra zero at the end of his check.
Yes. So there's a very good friend of mine, Michael Kerr, is a humorist, written a bunch of books, and he's a very, very funny guy. But he would never describe himself as a comedian, just because that kind of puts you in a small box, and it says, right, the only thing we're trying to bring about is a temporary change in state. So maybe you're miserable coming in and you're feeling great coming out. But someone who uses humor in what they're doing, I think, at least my sense, has a more lasting impact on the people that are in that audience, because sometimes some really important messages are embedded in humor beyond just jokes and things like that.
Yes, and I love the title of your podcast, David, because I think there's a link between funny and a fresh perspective. Like every time a punchline hits, for example, in a joke, there's like this aha moment that's linked to the ha-ha moment. And so using humor can be an instant perception changer,
Well, one of the things, I'm a member of the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, and one of the things that you'll often hear heard is that you don't have to use humor or be funny unless you want to get paid. So there is that sort of connection. But
yes.
So how did you come to your focus on humor and different aspects of entertainment? We're talking about juggling and things like that. You started when you were very young, but is that something that you did as an avocation, as a vocation, as a hobby? How did you come to be who you are?
Well, thank you for asking. I think it goes back to being 9 years old and having a mountain man uncle in Colorado who was quite a character. His name was Todd, and he would pull coins out of my ears and make rubber bands disappear, just simple things. And I found myself laughing, but I also found myself astonished. And so I started doing magic tricks when I was 9 or 10 years old. And it's interesting how many of the great comedians like the Johnny Carsons and the Steve Martins, and I think Dick Cavett is another one going way back, who started off with magic. And Steve Martin had a funny line about this. He was being interviewed once and he said, "Magic is great for anyone who desperately wants to be in show business but has no talent."
Oh.
But what I discovered was when you surprise someone, automatically they laugh, even if you're not seen as a comedian or a humorist. And so what I've tried to do in my new book, for example, is explore the different, what I call laugh languages. So I'm convinced that every human being is also a humor being, that each of us has a sense of humor. We might not feel comfortable doing stand-up or being the life of the party, but everyone can tap into their natural style of humor.
Well, so let's explore that a little bit. I'll tell you why I'm curious about that, what you just said, because I enjoy using humor and being playful and having fun for great purpose and bringing about organizational change and things like that. And I enjoy improv and improv as a sort of a way of life, building into your DNA. But and I say here, and anyone listening to this, you can hold me to this. You could not pay me enough money to do stand-up comedy. Absolutely could not. But you've talked about different ways, different laughter languages, which I'm intrigued by. So, and we will put the reference to your book and where they can get it in the program notes. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about how the Laughter Factors, the book, came about, and what those 5 laughter languages are.
Yes. Well, I had been hired to be the MC, believe it or not, for a very high-end wedding in the Bahamas one time. And as I got off the plane, I noticed this man who was a client in a different context. He was a sales manager with about 600 salespeople reporting to him. And what happened was I saw him get on the phone and make a call as he saw me approaching. And he said to his right-hand person, he said, book Adam Christing for our sales convention because he brings the laughter factor. And that stuck in my mind. And what he was getting at was, I think, the link between laughter and community. And I'm fascinated by words, David. And I noticed the connection between the word community and comedy, the same root.
Hmm.
And so as I started to explore, well, I might have the gift of surprising people because I love doing magic, and someone else might enjoy wordplay, which is another of the 5 laugh languages. One of my favorites is called in jokes. And this comes from listening to shared stories or experiences. So if you went to a comedy club, let's say in Toronto, and talked about, hey, remember the time that the printer broke and we had to, and you told some story like that, that's not going to get laughs at the comedy club. But in your office and with your colleagues, that might be the funniest thing ever to recall that shared experience. I'll just hit you with the other 2 laugh languages real quick. One is amplify. And when we think of some of the most famous comedians, like a Robin Williams, for example, it was like stories on steroids, right? Where it's just exaggeration and dramatic and acting out characters. And so if you meet someone who goes to the grocery store and you and I might say, well, yeah, it was a long line, but they turn it into this like epic tale of how they had to wait and the length of the receipt. They may have the gift of amplify. Now, the trickiest of the 5 humor tactics or languages is what I call poke. And this is delicate because sarcasm can make people feel inferior or put down. But my style of poke that I recommend to my readers is really making fun at yourself and then gently poking other people. If they know you care about them, they can actually feel celebrated with a gentle poke.
So I want to make sure I write these down. So there's poke, well, there's amplify, and sorry, the other 3 again were this one about language.
Yes, wordplay. Those who love puns and clever comebacks, even dad jokes would fit into that category. And the first one we mentioned is surprise.
Right?
And that one's probably the best approach if someone feels like I don't really have a sense of humor. Well, you can surprise someone with a funny gift or a card or even a meme. You can still tap into your humor and theirs when you surprise and delight them.
So I appreciate mathematics and things like that. I wasn't great at it though, so I've only counted 4. I've got
Okay.
amplify, poke, wordplay, surprise, and a missing one.
Yeah, it might have been in jokes. Is that
In
the one?
jokes, in
Yeah.
jokes. Thank you.
And so that's this
Right.
is the power of really shared experience where sometimes it feels like, hey, we're in a special club. Like you and I could probably talk about the speaking industry in a way that some listeners might be like, I don't really get it. But when you have a shared experience, like for example, when I hang out with other comedians, we can literally go to a Denny's restaurant and talk for 3 hours about when we bombed on stage, right? Like one time I lit the stage on fire, and then somebody else talks about the time that the Uber driver took him to the wrong hotel and he didn't even make the gig. Those become inside stories for people who have the same type of work, or even families can have great in jokes, of course.
So, in terms of the impact of these, are they the success of the measured by people laughing out loud, or as someone who's on the receiving end of any of these, is what they receive different from for each of the different laugh languages?
What a wonderful question. To give that a little extra thought, I would say it's the best communication's two-way, right? You have sender and receiver in the classic communication model. So our tendency is to use our laugh language, but it might not be someone else's, right? So if I love puns and I think I'm going to crack up my entire team by sending out a pun in an email chain, well, the people who gravitate toward wordplay as their laugh language might really laugh. But I think the best leaders, David, are the ones who really tune into what makes their team laugh
Okay.
and giving them more of that. So, for example, I do a lot of work as a master of ceremonies for corporate events. And it's tempting to do a little monologue, and sometimes I'll do that. But what's the most fun is when I take a handheld microphone into the audience and draw out other people's laugh languages, right? And share the spotlight with them. So getting back to your question, I believe that humor can be a shortcut to trust. And so when it's a two-way feeling, I've noticed that we tend to feel a lot quicker than we think, and so humor's almost like an instant feeling sensation. We physically experience it in our bodies. We get a rush of endorphins, and we get this happy buzz, and it doesn't last, super long, but it creates this instant rapport with people. So I think, to go back to what you're talking about, is understanding your audience and then understanding how you can best connect, not trying to be someone that you're not.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that occurred to me, when you were saying that, and one is that and it's hard to do this all the time, but you know, on the receiving end of some of these different laughter languages, like I like seeing if people's eyes light up or
Yes.
if their eyebrows go up, and it can be temporary, but there's a connection. You talked about the relationship between humor and trust, and you said it's two-way, and the more I thought about that humor allows trust to build, but also if you have trust, you allow humor to take place. Like there's a symbiotic relationship between the two. It could start at either end.
Well said. I think that sense of camaraderie, if it's already there, the humor comes more naturally. I've been in situations as a speaker where half of the audience is, let's say, management and half is staff, and there might be some union dispute. So my job sometimes is to try to use humor as a bridge. And so what I found in all of the languages that I mentioned, the I also call them humor tactics, because you don't have to use just one of them, but participation is the key. And so sometimes when we try to make someone laugh, there's that awkward moment of silence after the punchline, let's say, right? And if we fill that in, it can make us feel even more nervous and can make the recipient feel like, oh, she didn't give me a chance to laugh, you
I
know?
feel so stupid I didn't get it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the temptation when we tell a joke, for example, we might say, "Oh, you didn't get it." And so now humor, an attempt at humor becomes a disconnect rather than a connect, where if you
Right.
think about it, if you try a joke or something funny and you don't get a reaction, if you can let that be for a moment, that actually becomes funnier than the joke might have been in the first place.
Mhm. Yeah. So one of the things I wonder, like I had a chat with Phil Anders Belanger yesterday, and we were talking about engagement and that understanding people are diverse, and you could talk about it from an NLP perspective, that there's those that are kinesthetic, auditory, visual sort of things, or you could look at Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence, and Anders was talking about how in doing your presentation to try to address each of those, because you never know who's in your audience. So with the five laughter languages, is there a way when you are coming on to, let's say you're doing an event on stage, to determine in advance what they are? And if so, how do you do that? Or are there different ways that you can accommodate all of them, even when you don't know much about your audience?
Yeah, in my book, I actually have a whole page where I give an example of how someone could use all five of the humor tactics in one go. But I think if I were to consult with someone, and I often do this with speakers, is you want to feel comfortable in your own skin. And so if you try to be Mr. Miss Amplify and that's not your natural style, it's just going to feel phony or forced, right?
Mhm.
So I love this story, David. Do you remember the classic movie Willy Wonka, the
Oh,
first
yes.
one with Gene Wilder, right? I treasure this signed picture of Willy Wonka from Gene Wilder that I got many years ago. But this struck me. He said that he would only take the role of Willy Wonka if the director and producer allowed him to come out with the cane where he's coming out on the cobblestones and then the cane gets stuck and he trips. And the audience, the family's waiting to meet him kind of gasp like is he and then he does a somersault and ta-da. And his reasoning was from that point on, the audience would never know, is he funny and whimsical or is he older and fragile? And I don't go for that exact effect, but when I'm in front of a group as the MC, for example, the first thing I want them to do is to like me. And my secret for that is liking them first. So I try to affirm, not in an artificial way. So, for example, what I will do is everybody loves acronyms. Like I might make a joke like, hey, I flew Delta, and that stands for don't expect luggage to arrive. That gets a nice laugh. But then I'll say, but your company has the ultimate acronym, and I will do a 26-letter acronym about them. And what that does is it tells them, wow, he cares about us, he knows about us, and he's celebrating us. Now, when I then bring in some of my own humor, they feel like, oh, he's part of our group.
I love that. Absolutely love that. Love it to bits. So now I noticed that, and hopefully it's okay to put this in the program notes since I mentioned it, I probably have to now, but you had a little survey about the laughter languages that people get,
Yeah.
which I did fill out.
Oh, you
And
did? Do you know which one you discovered for you?
I have a very poor memory, which is why I don't have a script in these things. But
That's that's all right.
I
It
would,
makes it more fun.
so one of the things that, so amplify, poke, wordplay, surprise, in jokes. So I would say that I love I love wordplay and
Yeah.
puns, except I tend to avoid them because a couple of my colleagues that's all they do, and it drives me crazy, and I get sucked in just as a matter of self defense. It's like I
Yeah.
can see it, but I tend not to use it. You know,
Yes.
I I'm not answering your question here, but it's my
No, that's okay.
podcast.
But
It's my podcast. Who's asking who the
it's your
questions here?
podcast. Yeah.
Um,
But what you're referencing is we did come up with this quiz, and this is a little embarrassing, but I wrote the entire book and I wrote all the questions to help people identify their help them find their funny. Let me put it that way.
Love it.
And I was surprised by my own. I did not even know my own laugh language until I took this quiz, and it turns out it was surprise.
Hmm.
And then my wife and my assistant and people who work with me said, "Yeah, you do that all the time. You like to send quirky gifts and just surprise and delight people." So that did ring true for me. But that doesn't mean that I can't also access the other laughter
Yeah.
factors.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the things, again, my mind's going all over the place here, but I think one of the things that laughter and humor does is it engages people. If it invokes a response, that's a good thing. And I think I've been to a lot of conferences, a lot of meetings where it's just one way blasting of information, and
Right.
and there's no interaction with the information. It's just like it's about how to remain vertical, not embarrass yourself. And maybe I'll think about it later. But I
Right.
think for anything that engages people these days is incredibly valuable. And I think humor and laughter, certainly does that. And this is, I guess, another divergence, but there's some pretty crazy things happening in the world these days.
Yes.
And with what's going on, I won't get into the politics, but there's lots of stuff that's going on, and it's very easy for people to be disengaged because they feel there's nothing they can do about it, or to be enraged about it and still can't do anything about it. So what is the I believe there's some therapeutic value in laughter, and it's not being frivolous. I think it becomes a survival skill to work in this environment. And I'm just curious if you'd care to comment on that.
Yes, just like you, I don't want to get into specifics of politics, but I will say I can't remember in my entire career, having done this for multiple decades now, a time where I've had so many people come, as a speaker yourself, people will say, "Hey, that was great, that was inspiring, or that was funny." But what I'm hearing these days is people saying, "Wow, I didn't realize how much I needed to laugh, that the news is so harsh and there are wars and economic uncertainty, all these things." So I don't think humor gives us certainty. What it does is it allows us to sort of de-escalate the drama and the conflict. And I talk about this also at the beginning of my book. My first experience, I think, with humor was I was being chased by a bully in grade school. And this guy ended up becoming later, as he became an adult, he became an NFL football player. So he was a big kid. And I don't know what made me think of this, David, but I just started to make him laugh. And not only did he stop chasing me around and threatening to punch me, but we became very good friends. We're still friends to this day. So there is something about humor. Well, the great French philosopher Voltaire was not a man of prayer, but he did pray this prayer. He said, "Lord, make my enemies look ridiculous." And that's a great way to make a point. But I think it's also, well, like Lincoln said, the best way to defeat our enemies is to make them friends. And
Hmm.
so there is something you'll notice. I was one time seeing a Vegas comedy show with the late great Don Rickles, who certainly had the laugh language of Poke, right? But what I noticed was people were laughing their heads off, different ethnic groups, different political groups, because they all knew he was joking around and it was fun. And so I've never seen anything like the power of laughter to make people feel like, hey, we're all celebrating and having a party together.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's so key. Yes, I talked about community, right, as well, and communication, all those kinds of things, kind of pulling us together. I think, and I'm probably getting too much in my head here now, but I think laughter and humor is one of those things where we are in control of that. No one can make me laugh. In fact, some people just, kind of go ahead, smart guy, make me laugh.
Yeah, yeah.
But
There was even a TV show, remember, called Make Me Laugh, where people would try their best to hold it in. And I think Howie Mandel got his big break
right.
on that show, actually. But yeah, you're right. We can have this almost crossed-armed attitude of like, you're not going to make me laugh, right?
And how freeing it is when you're finally able to laugh. And in a world where it's so easy to feel out of control, to have even just that moment of self-control over my response to something like that.
Well, I also think as leaders, whether you're a manager, a teacher, a preacher, a salesperson, when you lead with laughter, you're basically saying, I'm going to create space for relationship and warmth and connection before I get into my pitch or my sermon or my content or whatever it is. And my experience is that people like to do business with those they like and trust. And again, that's where humor can be. I wouldn't call it the meat. I would say it's the glue.
Mm.
It's cement that keeps us connected.
You used the term bridge before. You were talking in the context of trust and humor. And I've been working on sort of a new set of programs that I'm calling Building Better Bridges. And that we're in the
Yes.
midst of all these crazy things. What do we do with our energy? How do we survive? How do we thrive? And we can build bunkers to keep ourselves safe. Just
Mhm.
pretend you don't know what's going on out there. We can build barriers to keep us apart. We can build bombs to compete with someone else. But I think
Mm.
what we really need to be getting better at doing is building bridges. And how do you build bridges? And those bridges can be between people, between teams, between organizations, between communities, between countries. And I think, if all of us, I'm just thinking that one of the gifts of laughter is it gives us a tool to help build bridges to start
Yeah.
with, right? And
That's
then we have
lovely. That's
something that we can
fantastic.
cross over and sit back and forth.
I know you haven't seen my book yet, but that's basically how I end the book. As I say, laughter is a bridge, and we've crossed it together. And I'm always struck by that. And this is something I haven't spoken about much, but one of the big takeaways for me is, as bridge builders, sometimes we can build a bridge and fail to walk across it ourselves. And so for me, as a humorist, I have to stop and say, wait, I need to laugh too. I can't just be the giver. I want to also be the receiver.
And that's, and again, I was thinking about, if you're truly in service of the group, you're not trying to make them laugh. You're trying to create an environment where they can choose to laugh,
Right.
right? As opposed to getting mad. Well, you didn't get that joke. What's wrong with you? It's not
Right.
about my ego. I am there in service of you by helping you laugh and see some humor and perhaps develop some skills to survive all this craziness. I love the sense of service that kind of comes through what you're talking about, Adam.
Oh, thank you. I give you a bad example, and I've made just about every mistake you can possibly make, but I think leading with weakness. And so if a manager gets up there and talks about how, and I've seen many do this, I've seen CEOs who, it's understandable, we want to be seen as someone with authority, but if I call this authenticity. So if you talk about a flop or a failure, and I'm not talking about self-defeating humor, that's going too far, but self-effacing humor, you've just made it so much safer for everyone in your group or your audience to feel like, hey, this is someone I can relate to, and you actually become more approachable by being transparent like that.
Mm. Sometimes it depends on the nature of the work, but in part of the contracting, quite often the person that hires me can be part of the problem. I'm
Mm.
sure it's never happened to you, but they bring in to do something, and especially if I get a sense of that, I want to get permission to use, I think, what you'd call the poke humor.
Yeah.
Right? So if I can do that and don't get kicked off the stage for it, it allows other people to loosen up a little bit and do the same.
Yes,
Because I do the poke in for them, their experience might be a surprise. Like, I didn't know he had a sense of humor, right?
that's right.
Things like that. But to have permission to do that, and I also, I'm at the stage now. If I can't have a good time doing my work, I can't do my best work. So if you want someone who is, running a session like a project manager and everything has to go exactly as planned, exactly on time, I'm not your person to do that, right? Because I can't operate my best in that environment. I have to pay attention to what's going on and respond. And I think as a humorist, you do as well, like reading what's going on with the audience, what's hitting and what's not. But it's not like we're going to get through these challenges or any challenges by being more serious about it. We want to take it seriously, but not be serious and try to move through that.
That's right. I love I don't mean to sound like Mr. Philosopher, but I can tell you're a deep thinker and reader. But I think it was G.K. Chesterton, the great writer, who said, angels can fly because they take themselves lightly.
Yeah.
And so we can take our work and our colleagues and even politics seriously, but when we stop taking ourselves so seriously. So, for example, I made a film years ago in Los Angeles, and because I raised the money and I was one of the producers, of course, I cast myself in the movie. And David, my acting was so bad, I got cut out of my own film. And when I tell I'm really not an actor, but when I tell actors about that, they crack up. And when I tell a story like that, instead of saying, hey, I made a Hollywood film, it makes me so much more relatable. And there was another word, I lost it, but basically, oh, here it is, flawsome, right? We all
Floss.
want to, yeah, we all want to be awesome, but if we're flawsome, it's kind of both because, like, oh, he's a real person, I can relate to that, and I actually like him better now. I can listen to his story about overcoming an addiction or how he went from broke to billionaire or whatever it is. But when you start at the top in your self presentation, I think you create this sense of superiority, or like I like that word you used, more of a bunker. I'm great and you're not.
So you just inadvertently triggered a word that I'm going to use, not flossom, but floffle. Like I remember, and not the
That's
kind that
I
the
like
food
that.
that you might be. I remember this session. I was just absolutely flawful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. So I'm going to use that. I'll give you credit for it the first three
Hey,
times I use it, Adam.
you should look up, see if you can get the .com on that. That's a winner. Yeah.
Good idea. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'll be right back. So Adam, your book is going to be out by the time this podcast launches. What I'd be curious if you were to say what are some real gems. I'm sure the whole book is full of gems, but things, one of the things I was particularly happy when I was putting this together, this concept or this idea, so that when the listeners buy the book, which I'm going to recommend after they do the survey about their laughter factor,
Yeah.
is what are some things to really, really pay attention to, some things to take away with them as a result of having read your book?
Well, thank you. Another wonderful question. I think one of the things that my early readers have noticed is it reminded them that they do have a sense of humor, because some people are like, well, I'm just not funny. And in my experience, you've probably met people who say, I'm just not good at memorizing names. Well, the reality is probably they haven't given themselves the chance. They don't stop and hear the person's name and link it to their face, right? So now they just have convinced themselves that they're not good with names and faces. Same with humor. Some people say, well, I'm just not funny. Well, you might not be a stand up, but the word funny is really the most important part. The word fun is the most
Mm.
important part of funny. So it doesn't, you can facilitate and orchestrate other people having fun. You might host a bad dad joke competition or some kind of an icebreaker at the office where you don't have to be the jokester, but you're helping create a context where people can laugh. So that's one takeaway. And I think another one is years ago, I was on a flight with Jay Leno and we weren't on the same event. I think he had just performed at Caesar's Palace and I had probably just been at Little Caesars, a pizza place or something. But I asked Jay for some tips on comedy, and he said a concept I'd never heard of called LPMs. And I said, what is that, Jay? And he said, laughs per minute.
Uh,
He said, as a comedian, you want to increase the laughs per minute. So what I tried to do in the book is sometimes if you read a book on humor, it can get into the science, it can get into the research, and that's interesting stuff. Like right now, I'm having my phone go off, which is that'll be an in joke for us, David. But what I tried to do with the book was to have, maybe I'll call it LPPs, laughs per page, so that when I give an example, when I talk about surprise as a humor tactic, I give examples of how you could employ that.
hmm.
And so every page, my goal is to have at least one or two good laughs. So it's a combination of experiencing it and learning how to do it.
Love it. So, okay. So folks that are listening, look for that in the laughter factor. It, like personally, I just think that our world would be a much safer place if people were willing to laugh a whole
Yeah.
lot more.
Yeah.
Just, it's so
Well,
critical.
I also think that there's a mistaken notion that comedians are happy all the time. And I'll tell you a quick story that's in the book somewhere. But a man's very depressed. He goes to see a therapist. He says, "I just don't know if I can make it. I'm so down." And the therapist realizes, "I better help this guy quick." And he tells the patient, "Oh, I just thought of it. There's a clown. We just went to the circus the other night. He'll make you laugh. You got to go to the circus. You'll feel so good. Laughter's the best medicine." And the patient says to the therapist, "I am the clown."
Oh.
And so one of my goals with the book, David, is to help people see that we need to receive that which we give. I love Adam Grant's book. I think it's Adam Grant wrote Give and Take. And so going back to your metaphor of the bridge, we want to be good senders of positive humor and receivers of it. And it truly is great for our health and our relationships.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here, Adam, and ask one final question for our listeners. And the question is this: what suggestions would you give to someone on how they can expand their appreciation for and ability to use the different laugh languages? So if I'm a golfer and my favorite club is the driver. I just love playing off the green.
Right.
If I'm terrible at the putter, I'm going to try to avoid that as much as possible, whatever the club might happen to be. And yet, if I get better at being able to use it and to acknowledge it, it's probably going to improve my game.
Right.
So are there any ways that someone could actually improve their ability to access these 5 laughter factors, to improve their game of being able to laugh more, create laughter more, and ultimately enjoy life more? Any way that they could expand that? Is that even a useful question?
That's a great question. Yes. This is going to sound self-serving, but if they go to thelaughterfactor.com and take the quiz in 4 minutes, they'll know their laugh language. And then I would say, get really good at one element within that language. So for example, if your laugh language is amplify, rather than feeling like you have to always be the life of the party and telling great stories, is master one joke. Like
Hmm.
find a good, clean joke that you could tell on the golf course, at the banquet, at the Rotary Club, whatever it is. And the difference between really a pro and an amateur is they say, I'm sure you've heard this in the speaking world, an amateur is always doing brand new material for the same old audience. And a pro is doing the same old material for different audiences. So if you perfect a joke or a story and try it out, you might not even get a laugh the first time. But just like that driver example, if you keep using that driver, you will get better at hitting those shots. So I would say discover your laugh language and then find one element. For me, it's the gift of surprise, right? So I have found a couple of surprise gifts that I can send people,
Hmm.
and I don't send the same person the same gift, but I might send that same gift to different people because I know it's going to delight them. So practice makes permanent, you might say.
Love that phrase. Love it. So Adam, thank you so much for being here with me today. I've totally loved that. I can't wait to get a hold of your book. And so first of all, thank you. Now, for those of you that are listening, Adam presents in the United States, in Canada, internationally. If you happen to see his name somewhere, just like when you hear your own name at a party, you zoom in and hear it. If you happen to get that name, Adam Christing, into your consciousness, find out where he's going to be and go and listen to it. Because based on my experience, it would be really enjoyable. And I know Adam would enjoy meeting you as well. So Adam, thank you so much for being here today.
It's been such a privilege. You're such a bright light, David. Thank you. And I hope you do develop this, the bridge concept. That's just a beautiful metaphor.
And I'm going to go register a couple of URLs as well. So
Good.
So this has been David Gouthro, another episode of Discover Fresh Perspectives. Next week, we'll have a totally new guest with a totally different set of perspectives. Thanks so much for joining us today. Subscribe now, because on Fresh Perspectives, every episode is an opportunity to explore new horizons and redefine what's achievable.